in the interest of time, let's move on to our last speaker. And the original title was the social welfare effects of, or the welfare effects of social media. It was changed to digital addiction. The floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much. It is great fun to be here. This is my first time at the EC conference. I hope not my last. I want to talk about, as you mentioned, two papers. The first is the welfare effects of social media, which is joint with Matt Gentzkow, Luca Bragheri, and Sarah Eichmeyer. And I'll just give you the highlight of that paper. We paid a bunch of people to quit Facebook before the 2018 midterm elections in the United States. And there are two key results. The first is that we have to pay people a lot of money to quit Facebook for a month. So the median person had to be paid $100 or I think it was $150. The average person had to be paid $150 to quit Facebook. The second key result is that quitting Facebook makes you happier. And that raises a question. Why do we have to pay people so much to quit something that makes them unhappy? And that is the question that motivates this second paper that I want to talk about more today, which is called Digital Addiction. It's, again, joint with Matt Gentzkow and with Lena Song, who is my PhD student at NYU and who is excellent. She's just graduated. The jumping off point for this, in addition to the welfare effects of social media paper, is that according to one survey, there are now 3.8 billion social media users worldwide, using an average of 2.5 hours per day on social media, mostly on mobile devices. And so a natural conclusion that you might draw from these facts is that social media and smartphones and maybe digital devices more broadly are generating vast consumer benefits. But there's another interpretation of these facts. In the books you see on this slide, as well as in survey evidence and just in popular conversation, you often hear people say that social media are addictive or otherwise harmful, and that we feel like we're spending too much time on these apps. Understanding the nature and magnitude of this possible digital addiction is important for a number of important questions, such as, should we as users and parents limit the time that we and our kids spend on social media? Should smartphone and social media platforms devote more resources to combating digital addiction and providing self-control tools? And third, could more regulation possibly produce some benefits? So given that introduction, in this paper, what we do is ask two questions. First, are we addicted, in some sense, to smartphones and social media? And second, how much does this possible digital addiction affect how we spend our time? To do that, we're going to do three things in the paper. The first is we will fix ideas. We'll define what we mean by digital addiction using a formal economic model. Second, we'll design and then present to, the results of a field experiment with smartphone users in the United States. And third, we'll use the treatment effects from that field experiment to identify the parameters of our structural model and use that model to quantify the effects of digital addiction on how we spend our time. The math of the model is in the paper, and I don't have time for it today. I just want to give you a sketch of what we're going to do. We're going to rewrite down a model that has the two key elements that clinicians and behavioral scientists use in their definitions of addiction. The first is habit formation. If I smoke more cigarettes, for example, this month, I'm going to get hooked on nicotine, and that's going to make me want to smoke more cigarettes next month. The second is self-control problems, or time inconsistency. And for clinicians, this is more broadly thought of as self-harm, but we're going to implement this formally as self-control problems. So that's going to mean that I use more in the moment than I would have chosen for myself in advance. So many smokers smoke cigarettes, but also say that they'd like to quit, and in fact would be willing to pay lots of money for techniques or devices that would help them to quit smoking. Let me now tell you about an experiment that we use to identify the formal parameters of the model that I just sketched. We recruited Android users who were adults in the US via Facebook ads that look like the two ads that you see on this slide. And we asked all of them to install a custom app that we had designed for our experiment, which is called Phone Dashboard. Now, the key functionality in Phone Dashboard that everybody in our experiment has is that it measures screen time. It keeps track of what app is on the foreground of your Android device. Our analysis and our experimental design are going to focus on 6 apps, which we collectively call FITSB. And it's too late to change that acronym, so I hope you like it. The 6 apps are Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, YouTube. Those are 5 key social media apps that in our pilots, people had said they felt like they overused. The 6th in the middle is web browsers. And we include that because if I pay you to use less Facebook on an app, the first thing you're going to do is go to facebook.com on your web browser. Our experimental design is illustrated here. We ran this in the year 2020, and the core of the experiment is 4 surveys at 3-week intervals. Surveys numbered 1 through 4. We have a baseline survey on April 12th, and then what we call survey 2 is implemented on May 3rd. And at that point, we randomize people into 2 key treatments using a factorial design, columns and rows, as illustrated in this figure here. So let me tell you what these 2 interventions are. The first is called the bonus. The bonus is a payment for reducing your FITSB screen time relative to your own baseline average during what we call period 3, which is the 3-week period between May 25th and June 13th. Okay, so it's a payment to reduce your screen time over 3 weeks. And it amounts to putting a price of $2.50 per actual hour of social media consumption. So it's actually not a big price. We pre-announced this subsidy on May 3rd. So we tell you on May 3rd that in the future you're going to receive this subsidy. You start to receive it on May 25th in what we call period 3. The second treatment is what we call the limit treatment. And this involves turning on an additional functionality that's built into our Phone Dashboard app for some randomly selected users. And the functionality allows people to set their own personalized screen time limits on any and all apps on their phone. So this person, as you see here, is setting a daily usage limit on Facebook of 1 minute per day. And when she reaches 1 minute, our Phone Dashboard app will force quit the Facebook app, and it will prevent you from using Facebook anymore. Let me just tell you a bit about the data that we collected as part of the experiment. We showed Facebook ads to 3.3 million people to try to recruit them into the experiment. We got about a 1% click-through rate, which is not unusual for digital advertising, especially when done by non-experts like ourselves. We then have a whole funnel, which I won't go through today, but a bunch of people refuse or they don't put in the app or whatever, and we get down to 2,053 people in red who are informed of what treatment group they're in. So this is our randomized group. So the difference between 3 million and 2,000 is big. We can reweight our sample to be representative on observable characteristics, but this really highlights that we have an external validity problem. It's not clear that our results will generalize to the full US population. Now, the good news is, of these 2,000 people that were randomized, 1,900 were retained through this entire experiment, which is actually quite an accomplishment because it's a 3-month-long experiment with a bunch of surveys, and it's not easy to. We asked a lot of our participants. So we have very little attrition, and that attrition is not unbalanced across the treatment and control groups. And so we can be confident that we have strong internal validity in our work. Let me now show you some model-free empirical results. Just descriptively, first, we asked people on some of our surveys, how much would you have ideally increased or reduced your screen time on Fitsby in the last 3 weeks? This is a histogram of the responses. You can see that the modal person, about 40%, says 0. I'm perfectly happy with the amount that I spend on my screen. But the remaining 50+% of people, over half of people say, I wish I was using less screen time. And in fact, of those people, the mode is, I wish I was reducing by half. So people want quite a big reduction in that subgroup. But this is just survey responses. And so I want to get to actual revealed behavior. First, I'm going to show you the effects of our screen time bonus on Fitsby use. So this is, on the y-axis of this figure, this is the treatment effect on social media screen time in minutes per day. And just to give you a baseline, the baseline number is 150 minutes per day. So these folks are heavy users. The bonus is a bonus for reduction in period 3. And so it's not surprising that we see a big reduction. We pay people to reduce their screen time. They reduce by almost an hour per day. Now, what happens in period 4 and period 5? If social media were not habit forming, then we would see once we stop paying people after period 3, that treatment effect would go to 0 if there were no habit formation. The fact that we still see treatment effects that decay over time, but they're still statistically significant and economically significant as well, that says that social media are habit forming. So that's the first piece of evidence on addiction. Now I want to show you evidence of self-control problems. I'm superimposing on this same figure in gray the effects of the screen time limit on Fitsby use. So people get those screen time limits throughout periods 2 through 5. And you see treatment effects of about 20 to 25 minutes per day throughout the experiment. So when you give people the better functionality to reduce their screen time, they use it, and it affects their consumption. So this is going to be our key evidence of self-control problems. What apps do people most want to reduce? We're going to define something called tightness, which is just the usage reduction that the limits you set would have caused in the baseline period. I'm going to plot that on the y-axis for our key apps. So the average person in our sample sets limits that would reduce Facebook use by 20 minutes per day. So we think of Facebook then, by this evidence, as the most tempting app in our sample. And that's followed by the web browsers, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter, and then other apps. People are willing to pay, I'm going to skip this, but I'll say qualitatively that people are willing to pay for the screen time limit functionality that we give them. When we threaten to take it away, they say, no, I will give up money to keep it. Now I'm going to give you just a quick highlight of the model estimation and counterfactuals. The math is in the paper. If you like math, there's a lot of it. Although for this group, maybe it's not a lot. I don't know. The dynamics are what gets complicated here. We do estimation via indirect inference. By that I mean we're going to take the Euler equations for a consumer in our model, and we're going to rearrange them to characterize the structural parameters, like the habit formation parameter, the self-control problem parameter, et cetera, as functions of the treatment effects. It turns out we can do that in a very intuitive and transparent way, which is one thing I like about this. Then once we've done this estimation, we're going to predict steady state consumption for each person in the sample with counterfactual parameters, for example, taking away self-control problems. So let me show you in our final slide of results the histogram, i.e. the distribution of the effects of self-control problems on Fitsby use. And so again, what we've done here is we said for each individual, because of the tightness of the limits that they set, we can figure out their personal perceived self-control problem and what the magnitude of that self-control problem is for that individual. Then we re-simulate how your consumption would change if we got rid of that self-control problem entirely, perhaps by giving you a really good self-control app. And then simulate how your consumption would re-equilibrate as a result of the changes in habit formation that accrue over time. So this is the histogram of that steady state effect of temptation on FITSB use. You can see that actually for a large minority of the sample, over 100 minutes a day of their time use is caused in our model by self-control problems. So it's just, I think this is a really striking fact. At least in our sample, there's a large minority of people who are distorting their time use substantially because they don't have good self-control tools. Okay, so in conclusion, most people in our sample, at least, want better self-control tools qualitatively on surveys, use them when offered, as I showed you, and are willing to pay for them. Some digital technologies thus seem to involve habit formation and self-control problems, just like smoking cigarettes and other classic addictive goods. In our model, on average, 31% of smartphone social media use in our sample is caused by self-control problems. And that suggests to me that more robust screen time limit functionality, if offered by the platforms, would increase consumer welfare. And so I'll leave you with two questions for discussion. First, what social responsibility do we think tech companies might have to offer more robust self-control tools? And second, what regulation, if any, should be considered? So thanks very much for being here. Thanks for including me. And I'm excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Hunt. That was super interesting. I bet there are tons of questions. Unfortunately, we are a couple of minutes over time, and I know that the next session is going to start in about 5-6 minutes. So I would suggest we take the questions offline. I suppose you can stay around for a bit. For those of you who are interested, and for the rest of you, please feel free to join the other sessions in about 5 minutes. But give our speakers another round of applause.